this is one of my favorite soapboxes, so brace yourself. But I really hate the idea of work-life balance. Not because we shouldn't think about how we integrate that, but the very frame of a balance feels to me like it is setting up a trade between the inherent goodness of life and the inherent badness of work. So, we have to get enough life to make up for work. And that simply becomes a numerical calculation based on time, based on, however you decide to do that. And I think that's garbage. I think that we were created to work, and that most of the reason many of us don't like it is because we think about it improperly. God gave a charge in the Garden of Eden to Adam and Eve, not just to sit there and enjoy it, but to work and to cultivate it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Kipper Bros podcast. I'm your host, Titus, joined by my co-host, Joe. What is up?
What's up?
Unfortunately, Tim is not feeling well, but in his place, we have the man who married our sister. Shane Iwashige is joining us, our brother-in-law from Kansas. How are you doing, Shane?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you on here. First question here. I have these questions all queued up. First question for you, Shane. What is your net worth?
I really appreciate that question. Yeah. And I knew it wouldn't be a kid for family conversation, if I didn't get asked that.
Right.
So like more than you can imagine.
More than I can imagine. Great. I do want to hear, Shane, what got you interested in entrepreneurship. Maybe you can share a bit of your journey, like your work history. What were some of your first jobs, and what made you feel like, hey, I want to start my own thing?
Yeah. So the thing that that I often point back to is kind of my first foray into entrepreneurship, and I didn't even know what the word meant, but came out of applying for a job. I was 12, I think, and kind of wanted some more money to do things with, but my parents were not actually in a great position to give me more money, and they had this crazy idea that maybe I should consider getting a job. So I thought, well, I don't mind working. I can do that. So I went to a local greenhouse. This was springtime and, transplanting work, things like that. I thought I might be able to get a job there. And so I filled out an application, and, it makes more sense to me now than it did then, but it really irritated me that they did not even have the good graces to reply at all to this 12-year-old's application. So that sort of ticked me off. And I think with the help of my mom, I think she suggested the idea, but I made up order forms for onion plants and distributed them to a variety of area churches through their mailboxes and whatever, and said, hey, I'm going to order onion plants. Do you want to order some? And I followed up with phone calls, and I don't remember how many onion plants we bought and sold, but I ordered in cases of onion plants and sold them to area gardeners. So I kind of look back at that as being the time where it connected for me that I could go do something for somebody else, which was fine. That's what I actually wanted. But if I can't do that, then I can try doing some of the same things for myself. So not a highly profitable venture, but it did kind of spark the idea.
Yeah,
that I at least have some of those options.
that's cool. And so what was your first more long-term business venture that you got into? Because I think you tried to start a farm where you were raising livestock for a while, right? Was that the first thing? And then how did you get switched over to the rock group?
Yeah, so the farm was probably the thing that I, really thought was going to turn into a full-time gig. And I've always been trying side hustles. I raised dogs. My brother and I cut and sold firewood. I bought my first rental property in I don't think I was quite 20 yet, late teens, early 20s. So a little bit of this and that, I just like trying things. But we bought a farm from my grandfather, and we raised beef on the farm. I rented the barn out to a friend of mine who raised pork there, had another friend who raised chicken for us, and we retailed an antibiotic-free beef, pork, and chicken at the farmer's market and directly to consumers. So that was really the goal, that, I would be able to build that into a full-time gig where I step into production and raise all of those things myself. And then, again, as a side hustle, one of my brothers and a friend asked if I would manage rental properties for them. Just they each bought one, and I started doing that, and that really started growing quickly. And I was 3, 4 years into trying to build a farm, and it was not scaling, it wasn't profitable, and the property management side really was just kind of exploding accidentally. And so about a year into that trajectory, I said, I think I need to see some open and closed doors here, and kind of pivoted away from the farm and went into property management.
Right. And so that's what you're managing now is the Rock Group, and a lot of new companies have been birthed from that first venture, which was property management.
Right.
So can you describe the different companies you started, all the different service offerings that the Rock Group currently has?
Yeah. So, the reality is most stuff had its genesis in property management. So that was kind of our initial and our flagship brand. A couple years in, so our model was that we bought rental properties for investors, and we had maintenance and remodel teams who would get them up to speed and get them ready to rent. And there was a shift in the market a couple years in where we couldn't buy houses nearly as quickly as we had been able to. So I had about 6 people in the maintenance and remodel side that I needed to find something else to do with. So in 2015, 15, 16, somewhere in there, we split the company into rentals and rock renovation, um, and started bidding, some third party maintenance and remodel work. In the beginning, we did, we still mostly worked for ourselves, but started adding in more other businesses. In that first year, I think we did 10% work for other people, 90% work for ourselves. And by the time I sold the company then in 21, 22, those ratios had pretty much completely reversed. The vast majority of the work was being done for third parties. So that was renovation. Again, just grew out of what we already had, and that's kind of the trajectory that continued. We had our mower, and we had to mow our vacant properties, some of our multifamilies. We needed to provide lawn care for. In 2018, I had an opportunity to buy out a small lawn care company, so I did that, and we merged our route and that route, and went into lawn care for a while. And, very similar trajectory with our janitorial services. We had to clean vacant rentals between occupancies. And so we had kind of a loose network of subs that we worked with to get that done. And we wondered, what if other people would pay us to do this? And so I think that was also in 2018.
Mhm.
We kind of split that off and rebranded that. And again, those ratios, have completely switched now. A very small percentage of our work there is done for rock rentals. Kind of in the middle, we got, I got licensed as a real estate agent, so I sell some real estate. Yeah, and a few different things along the way. After I sold the construction company in the early 20s, I had frankly gotten kind of spoiled by having access to some of the equipment that we had, and was a little sad about seeing that leave. And so I tried to figure out how I could get other people to pay for it so I could still use it when I wanted to. And that really was how we started Skyland Industrial, our equipment dealership. We had a skid steer, mini excavator, started renting that out, slowly started adding some pieces on the rental side. And that was getting rolling in, I think, 21, right in the middle of post-COVID shortages and things like that. So I started buying and selling some used skid steers. The used market was really hot. So I bought and sold some used skid steers, and really accidentally got into the skid steer attachment market because I'd have a machine and people would call and say, well, I already have a machine, but I need some of these attachments, and nobody has them. Everybody was back ordered. So I was able to source a couple of manufacturers, smaller manufacturers that didn't have the same brand name recognition as some of the larger players, which meant they had some inventory, and started stocking and selling some new skid steer attachments, and that really started growing. So I think in the beginning of, I don't know, time runs together, either 23 or 24. I think 24, we quit selling the used machines and went all in on the new skid steer attachments for our sales side. So
Nice.
that's been a lot of fun watching that grow over the last couple of years. And yeah, so that's kind of what we've where we're at. We have tried a few other things along the way, and this was more of a personal project than a rock project. But we did overstock sales, Amazon overstocks, returns, things like that. So yeah, a few different things.
Sounds like
So,
you need more to do. You don't seem like you have a lot going on there.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay entertained.
so Shane, as an elderly gentleman with many years of business experience, what would you say to the younger generation who wants to get into business? What would be your number one lesson to share with them today?
I've actually given this some thought recently because the reality is, I simply could not do what I have done if I were launching now versus in the era that I did. The farther we get from um, the post 2008 crash world, the teens were just a stupid era in our economy. Cheap money, economic growth up and to the right. Like if you're marginally competent, you could get things working. You could get away with things in the teens that you simply could not get away with now because you have to sharpen your pencil for, allocations of capital. Cash flow is much tighter in a lot of areas. Honestly, I am having to relearn a lot of the lessons that I thought I had learned simply because the world is a completely different place now than it was, when I was thinking about scaling. So I am decidedly more conservative now than I used to be. My wife would be surprised to hear that, but my appetite for risk, is a lot lower. I think it made a lot of sense in the teens and early 2020s to leverage capital heavily. I think I'm shifting to prioritizing cash flow and minimizing some of those liabilities. So it really is a challenge for people my age who, in our professional lives, have only known what is actually a strange anomaly in, the trajectory of American economics. I mean, I have some things I've learned, and some of those are more applicable than others in this era.
So with interest rates kind of being higher, but they're still not what they were back in the 80s, right?
No, by
90s.
by comparison, like these are very normal rates. There's nothing ridiculous about our current interest rate environment, but a lot of things make sense at 3 and 4% interest that simply
hmm
don't at 8 or 9%.
What about Dave Ramsey's method of building and scaling businesses where you go cash? What are your thoughts on that? Which stands in stark contrast to Robert, what's his last name? Rich Dad Poor Dad author. Yeah. You should know your
Um,
Japanese, right?
yeah. So
Wow.
so I hope this podcast doesn't go viral because I'm sure this is like wrong on so many different levels. My personal take is that Dave Ramsey is great for the 80s and into the 90s. He completely screwed a generation of young entrepreneurs and homeowners, especially homeowners in the late aughts and into the teens. I think the advice he gave there made a generation really lag and fail to seize many of the opportunities. I think Dave Ramsey advice makes a lot more sense in the 20s. And basically, it does boil down to risk and cost of capital. And like I think his cash only advice in a really artificially low interest rate environment when there was significant growth potential really disadvantaged an era of entrepreneurs and homeowners.
In the 2010s, it made a lot of sense to steward the bank's money, right? But now it still might, but doesn't it all come down to your profit margins? Because if you're borrowing money at 5, 6, 7%, you just have to make sure that that profit margin is high enough to cover that. If you're at a 20% profit margin, you're probably still okay, you know?
Yeah. You could build net worth in the teens with really garbage cash flow. Just because the cost of capital was basically zero. And now you actually have to make sure that your profits cover operations and that, you're able to cash flow that debt service.
Have you ever thought about it, those people that got like a massive mortgage in 2012 for maybe under 3%, and it's like a massive mortgage and they're just riding it into 2025? Like,
Yeah.
can you imagine? Like, that's the banks are so underwater on those loans. Like, I can't even imagine how much
Well,
money
and,
they're losing on
and
those loans.
Yeah, and it's part of why our real estate markets are in such gridlock because we have generations of people who would be happy to sell their home and relocate, but they can't afford to leave their mortgage because if they trade off, I mean, typically we think about upward mobility, right? Like most of us don't like the idea of downsizing or a deteriorating condition until we're ready to retire or empty nesters, whatever. But one of the things that happened with a crazy interest rate environment like we had was we completely broke the cycles. Most people start with a starter home. They buy something a little bigger as their family grows, a little bit bigger, and then you know, maybe that's their forever home. Maybe they stay there for a long time until they retire and are ready to downsize. Well, what we did, because the cost of capital was so low, was we took people from renters or moving out of their parents' home to buying their forever home. And it could be it worked because, the cost of capital to buy that house that costs several $100,000 more than normally people would be able to afford, the payments were the same. So they're locked in, you know, with very low interest rates and to actually move, so now we've just simply adjusted expectations that our forever home is the stepping stone. So people are looking to upgrade and at anywhere close to the same payments, they're at best staying flat, probably taking a downgrade. So there simply is not inventory moving in the market because we just jumped so many cycles in buying habits.
So you're saying nowadays it makes sense to be a lot more conservative thinking about buying a house or starting a business or scaling your business. Is that solely because of interest rates, or would you just say the economy in general makes it necessary to be more conservative?
Yeah, I think the economy is very shaky. Partly because I think the fundamentals are sketchier, in supply and demand, but just a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the markets right now. Markets and global trade can be changed by a tweet or an X or a whatever they're called now. And so like I think a more responsible position um, is making sure that you can pivot in any direction because the economy on Tuesday might be a completely different one than the economy on Saturday, especially if you're in any retail with any import components. I am, in most of our businesses, I am less concerned about like direct impact because we're mostly in services. Our cost will not shift significantly based on import, export, tariffs, et cetera. But the ripple effects like we're definitely starting to see in the consumer market people are being much more conservative with their spending and watching what that looks like.
Did you see the higher 2025 bill that was proposed by a senator? This
No,
this
I didn't.
would
Tell me about it.
this would royally screw us. So it's a bill proposing that all outsourced services are taxed 25% as well as lose their tax deductible status. So it
Wow.
would impact our profitability by like 43% if this thing went through, which I don't think it will. I think he's just throwing something out there and trying to make a name for himself. But yeah, so far the services industry hasn't been too affected, but it might be, if
Yeah.
the current trajectory continues, current trend.
Yeah.
So Titus, you guys are registered though in the US, right? Like, but are you still
Yeah, so we could keep most expenses in the US. Like right now, our employment visas require us to pay ourselves here, but maybe we could get a different kind of visa, pay ourselves in the US. But still, like our Indian labor, there's no way to avoid that. Even if we paid them from our US company, that the bill would cover that as well. Employees out of the country, any subcontracted work out of the country, which I mean, I think there's just like the IT sector and all of that. There's no way something that extreme is going to go through, but I could see something like that happening, in the
Yeah.
next 3 years. So
Yeah, it's a
interesting
crazy
times.
ride.
Yeah. So kind of shifting gears here a little bit. One thing that you used to call yourself, or the title that you would have, and I'm not sure if this is still the case at the Rock Group or not. I remember you would refer to yourself as the keeper of the culture, which I found really interesting. So can you explain what that title means and what you're trying to convey and identify with there?
Yeah, so I still assume that as my primary title. It's a good question. I don't always know exactly what that means. What it does mean is that I think that that is my most important work, and some days I do it better than others. So a lot of that comes from my bias, and so my experiences have shaped how I think about organizational culture and growth. And as you know, I've pivoted more into leadership coaching and group facilitation, things like that. So I love getting to do some of that work, and it stems from my bias that says that loves work and that believes that work should be impactful, meaningful, and fulfilling, both for the people doing the work and for the people that receive the goods and services. I think we have bought a lie in the US that, so this is one of my favorite soapboxes, so brace yourself, but I really hate the idea of work-life balance. Not because we shouldn't think about how we integrate that, but the very frame of a balance feels to me like it is setting up a trade between the inherent goodness of life and the inherent badness of work. So we have to get enough life to make up for work. And that simply becomes a numerical calculation based on time, based on, however you decide to do that. And I think that's garbage. I think that we were created to work, and that most of the reason many of us don't like it is because we think about it improperly. I think, some books like Tim Keller's Every Good Endeavor, God gave a charge in the Garden of Eden to Adam and Eve, not just to sit there and enjoy it, but to work and to cultivate it. And I believe that his design from the very beginning is that work should be meaningful and fulfilling. And we have destroyed that to where we have made it simply a transactional calculation, that if you sell me your time and your soul for a certain amount of time, I will bribe you with that, with a little bit of cash. And the reality is we spend a third of our lives and half of our waking hours, most of us, at work. And if that's just a grind, if that's not meaningful and fulfilling, that feels like a stewardship issue to me, that we are wasting one of God's most precious gifts of life and time. So I have a strong bias that says that we need to think about work not simply as a trade of time for cash, but about fulfillment and purpose and calling. And as a top authority in my system, I believe it is my job to make sure that the work that happens in my organization um, is consistent with those values. So that's why I take the keeper of the culture. A conflictual interpretation is that it's a lofty title that doesn't actually mean anything, and there might be some reality to that. The other piece that is absolutely true is I am not the only person responsible for establishing culture, right? Culture emerges, and everybody on the team is a part of that. I believe it is my job to clarify uh, what the culture is that we want in our companies, and to play a role in making sure that the people that are a part of our team share that vision. And I've wrestled over the years with how exactly culture develops and is shaped. And honestly, I am less sure now than I used to be that it is developed by changing people's priorities. I'm at least curious and willing to rent the idea that organizational culture needs to be clarified and is mostly maintained by making sure that the right people are part of the team and that the wrong people aren't. And I don't really like that because I believe that we can all grow, that we can all develop, and even when we show up ineffectively at some points in our lives, we can develop and change our priorities, change how we show up. So I'm not leaning into the fixed mindset explicitly that, where we are is where we have to stay. And some of the most important things in an organization I think are really, really difficult to teach and change. People kind of have to bring with them.
I don't think it's in dissonance with the growth mindset to say that, I mean, the whole Jim Collins concept of right people on the bus, right seats, that kind of thing, because anybody can grow, develop, but it takes, when it comes to culture, a lot of it rides so heavily on values. And so a good person may fit really well in your business, but not in Titus's business. And
Right.
a good person may thrive in one business, but not the other. And so sometimes just really ensuring that fit and clarifying, first of all, you as a keeper of the culture need to clarify your values. Like, what are they? And so everybody knows what they are. So you'll attract the right people into your business. But then to like, just, yeah, that whole communication
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
building
that's
that
a
and making sure that people are thriving. Yeah.
that's a great point. I think about good culture very, very differently than I used to. I used to have a pretty clear picture for what a good organizational culture means. I am simply less convinced now that there is such a thing as a good organizational culture. And I think there are a lot of good organizational cultures. And what's most important is that there is clarity about what that is and that the people that are part of the team engage with and are invested in that vision of organizational culture. So, I know some folks whose organizational cultures, I would hate if my business looked like theirs. And I think they've got pretty strong organizational culture because they're clear about it. The people that are there are invested in it, and they are successful in creating what they envision. So I'm less convinced that there is a good organizational culture and, renting the idea that what's most important is that it is clear and that there is alignment.
I love that so much because I think that it speaks to, okay, for example, what you're describing, that other business, I don't think you would fit very well as an employee in that organization or business, likely. But they're attracting people that do fit there and do share their values. And so they're providing a place for them. They're providing a home for those people to do more than just work. The people that they hire probably wouldn't do so well in your business. So I think that it's a whole important thing of just building that, building your team, make sure you provide a place, a space for people who share the values of the organization and build that team so you can achieve it together. And then too, for us to be gracious with other businesses, other organizations that don't look like ours and say, that's different. It's probably not bad unless it is for some reason, but most likely it's not a bad culture. It's just a different culture. And
Yeah.
they're providing a
Yeah.
home for people who share their values, which is actually
Right.
a service to
Yeah.
humanity.
So when you're hiring someone, is there a balance that you need to strike between finding someone with the necessary skills and someone with who shares your company's culture, or do you need to find both, or are they the same thing? Because we've had people on our team who we really like, great cultural fits, but they just couldn't do the job. I wonder, like, how do those things relate, like the competency and values?
Yeah. Absolutely. You have to have both because, if you have somebody, and I've had situations like that too, where I really like the person, they just weren't effective. And at some point you have to, make progress on that. I would say, yeah. So I don't know if it's a balance as much as you need all of both. So if I think about balance, it's like, well, how much toxic culture can I tolerate in exchange for technical performance? Right. And when you think about it as a balance, like it's really hard to know, when you're in the perfect sweet spot, but it's really hard to know when you're far enough out of alignment there that you need to make a change. So I think about it in terms of like two, and I'm mostly making this up as I go, so bear with me, but like two separate columns. You need technical capacity and you need cultural fit. And actually compromising on either of those starts you down a really dangerous path. Where was I going with that? Yeah, I think you need both. And life is full of trade-off choices, right? So there have certainly been times where we've said, well, I wish this person would be better technically, but they're close enough and a
Hmm.
good enough cultural fit that, we'll just accept that package. What I will not accept is somebody with technical excellence who is not a cultural fit,
Hmm.
because I don't care how good that person is. If they're not a cultural fit, they are acting as a toxic cancer in the system. And so if this person is an A-list performer, but is killing the culture, you actually need that person to perform at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times their current capacity to make up for the toxicity and capacity that they're bringing into the rest of the system, and taking a lot of the rest of the team out of the game. So I think prioritizing technical capacity over cultural fit is really, really dangerous, not only for that person, but for the ripple effects that it has in the entire system. And there, you guys can read the books, but there are lots of examples, lots of studies about how a cohesive, subpar team will always outperform a toxic genius. And so, ideally you get all of both. But given a choice, I will always take a cohesive subpar team over a toxic genius.
I'll say this real quick. Yeah, I think that's so true, Shane. And I think of the growth mindset as being something you could think about when you have a cultural fit, but the technical skills are not where you want them. Well, you could invest in training for that person and have exactly what you need. But if you have cultural misfit, any amount of growth mindset is probably just not gonna. It's just not gonna
Yeah.
help you. It's not gonna help you there.
Yeah. And again, somebody who is not a cultural fit, that doesn't mean that they're a bad person
Right. Right.
necessarily. It just means that they are working against the organizational progress.
And it could be harmful for them too, because they could be trying to bring their value system in with a different value system of the organization. And there's just going to be a lot of dissonance. It's
Yeah.
going to cause a lot of problems for both them and the organization.
Yeah, is there any place that you want to send people, Shane? I know you're doing some speaking, some business coaching. Is there any way people can get in touch with you if they want more of this slightly gray bearded wisdom?
Lightly gray bearded. I love that. Incidentally, I love my gray hair because, I think it makes me look more intelligent. So I'm all here for the
Nice.
gray. Yeah. So I do some private practice, leadership coaching and development. So I'd be happy to connect with anybody there. Shane at the rockgroupks.com is my email address. I do some contract coaching and some facilitation work with the Kansas Leadership Center. So, if you need a larger organization, always be happy to refer people there. I speak at some Anabaptist financial seminars. I coordinate some Anabaptist financial seminars and do a little bit of training work otherwise. I really don't have, a website, a place to send people, because most of this is growing pretty organically, but always love to connect with good people.
Awesome. Okay. Well, hey, thanks, Shane, for coming on the podcast. Tell our sister hi for us.
All right, will do. Thanks for having me.
Okay. See you.
Bye, guys.